And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bubba and the BatFlip, episode 112. Continuing our positional previews for the 2022 fantasy baseball season. Heading to the shortstop position, which is absolutely loaded. But as you'll find out shortly, Toby and I were joking before, it gets dry quick for some weird reason. But we'll get to all that shortly. I'm on Twitter at BDentric, and my co-host already hinted at him, as always, on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. Toby, how we doing, man?
We're doing great, Bubba. I mean, overwhelming support for the audio changes to the podcast. Gotten some good feedback.
Yep.
A lot of DMs about how my voice really just is incredible and makes people's day. So that's what I'm going with. I'm just kidding. Nobody has actually DM'd me that, but we have gotten good feedback on the audio. So I'm going to keep just blasting with this mic right in my face right here. So for you, those of you on YouTube, I apologize. I know you want to see my beard, but you're just going to have to deal with a little bit of my nose and my eyes. All right.
We have very, very good eyes when it comes to fantasy analysis. It keeps me locked in.
Oh, dang. That was good. That was good right there. Holy cow.
When you're blessed with a voice for radio and a look for nobody else, you have to have kind words. That's how my wife got suckered into this whole thing. So it works.
Man.
But fun stuff. We got shortstop coming up. We've already covered catcher, first base, second base. Usually we just do the top 10 in ADP. We're going to do 15 because a lot of carryover from second base. So we won't really touch on those guys, as you will find out. But as always, before we get into each player we discuss, Toby, what is your strategy for shortstop? I kind of hinted at it earlier. It's like, right now I'm using ADP since January 19th. It gives us about 18 drafts, give or take. And the top 8 shortstops go in the top 50 picks. So it's like it's deep, but it goes quick. So what's your strategy?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating position because it's the deepest position and it has the most elite talent, like you just mentioned. But the question is, where are you getting quote unquote perceived value? Like when I think about value as the difference between, ADP or the cost and dollar value versus what somebody's going for in the draft, well, shortstop is definitely deep. And also as a product of the fact that it is so deep and it is so good and so many guys are higher up on the draft board, there isn't a ton of quote unquote value or perceived value difference between a lot of the players. And I think for that reason, I actually find myself waiting for a little bit. I mean, there's a couple factors, right? Is I tend to be a little bit more pitching heavy, so, and the shortstops are going fast and furious. You're also looking for it to get your closers early, this year. And that's something that I've been doing as well in my drafts. So haven't had a ton of opportunity to really draft shortstop. And it is a fascinating position, I think, for that reason, because really throughout, you can look at the whole, like when I look at kind of the column and I have some conditional formatting. So I got like my greens are popping, those are the good values. I got my reds, which are kind of like the stayaways a little bit. There's not a ton of green. There's a lot of yellow. There's some heavy instances of red that I'm looking at my spreadsheet. And so really, I think for me, like what I've found myself doing a lot is actually, because I'm prioritizing pitching, because I'm prioritizing the closers, I really haven't gotten a lot of those shortstops. Now, I think I do have one share of Tatis Jr., who for me would be the number one player. Would be the number one player, I think, pretty clearly if he didn't have the shoulder issues. I think the shoulder issues are enough, right? So that our boy Trey Boo, not to be confused with, sorry, I think I just confused them.
You did. Trey Boo, just like it's like Trey Boo Jr. He's a smaller
Trey Boo Jr.
This is Yogi.
Trey Boo middle infield is it's close enough where you maybe want to be on the safe side. But I do have Tatis. I got him at 4 in one draft. So this is all a long way of saying I actually find myself waiting on shortstop and not grabbing one of the elite guys. I can definitely see why you would want to do that. And then kind of going after kind of this, there's a really nice middle infield grouping. We've talked about some of the guys, but kind of your Polanco's, Baez, Chisholm, those types of players I've been a little bit more into. And then even falling further back, I've got some teams where Miguel Rojas is my starting shortstop. And so the beautiful thing about fantasy baseball, right, is you don't need to have an elite shortstop to have the best team, right? You don't have to have any one particular way of doing things or any one particular player. What you're really trying to do is build the best overall team. And so I think it's important to have that in mind as you build your shortstops, because I think it's really easy to fall into a situation where you're like, oh my God, I don't have a shortstop. I need to get one of these really good guys. And maybe that's not the best build, or maybe that's not the thing that your team needs the most of at that moment of time in the draft. So, I don't know if that's helpful at all, but I really think, it's super deep. We all know that. It's super good. There's so many good players there, but that doesn't mean you need a super good player at the shortstop position. You need a guy that fits your team construction well. You need a guy who can produce some value for you, do better than what you drafted. And I'm not sure going after some of those elite guys is going to be the best way to do that. Although there are some really, really good players there.
There's a lot of good, really, really big nuggets you put there. Like, for one, I can make the joke, of course, there's no SS in team, so you don't have to have a stud shortstop, if you want to go.
There's not.
Yeah, if you want
Wait,
to go
I'm going to go to
real
dictionary.com. I'm going to check this
double
out.
check for
Just
me.
double checking. There's no SS. There's no double S in team.
There we go.
We're
there
good.
we go. So you got to build a perfect team, like you said. And and it's a good point to keep reminding people, because we've talked about it like in the review shows and stuff, that and something we both admitted we need to be better at when you're building your team. It's like, you don't have to always focus on filling like the starting roster out. Sometimes getting that next best player on the bench and then coming back and getting someone later makes your team better. And that's the same thing in shortstop. Like I said, the top 8 shortstops on the top 50 ADP. You want to go deeper in that, the top 14 shortstops are in the top 88 picks. Like, that is insanity if you really think about it. And it's one of those in like a 15-team league, that's 6 rounds. And so those are flying off if my math's correct, that's 6 rounds. So yeah, that's quick. That's real quick. So it's one of those, if you blink, you're kind of like Toby said, if you go 2 pitchers, you get a closer, maybe get a catcher, that's 4 rounds. Now you throw in, like, you really quickly running out of shortstops, and it's not the end of the world. I think when we talk about some of these later picks we like, their options, the reason why a lot of these shortstop get put up early is because of stolen bases. That's a big thing. There's some 5 category studs, but after like the first handful, like Justin Mason pointed out to me when I give him a hard time, and I mentioned about Cedric Mullins the other day, so of course he enters the chat. And he said, like, I believe it was Steamer or the Bat, there's only like 5 players projected to go 2020. Mullins is one. The other 4 guys are basically 3 shortstops, and like I think J-Ram. So like they're all in the top 5 picks ADP. So it just goes to show you that you're really paying for certain commodities, where if you build your team properly, like Toby said, it's not the end of the world. It really makes me want to go back and look at, I've done like 10 drafts or so, and I'm really curious because I'm in one right now where I got my first share of Boba Fett at pick 5.
Boba Fett?
Yeah, Big Boba Fett. Like Boba Fett. I haven't seen that show yet. I'm waiting to binge it.
I haven't seen it. I haven't even seen Mandalorian, Bubba.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
like,
We got to talk about that.
Holy cow! I'm waiting for my son's like 8.
And
we watched one episode, and I was like, I think this might be a little bit
That's fair.
too much.
He's close at least. You don't have to wait like my daughter's 19 months old, so I got a long ways to go for that.
There you go.
But there's different ways to do it. Like, there is a comfort factor of getting like a Trey or Tatis, a Bichette early, knowing, okay, I got this here and I can kind of approach later. And then there's the point you mentioned, like, do I have to force my hand? Because you mentioned that pocket of Baez and Chisholm and Polanco. That's still in the top 6 rounds. So it's like you're still having to kind of, you're not forcing your hand, but you're kind of in your head going, I got to get one of these. Or is it Miguel Rojas? Is it Ahmed Rosario, who's not bad? We're going to talk about him later. Like, there's a lot of options, like Toby said. I think it's a very important part to mention. I won't keep blabbering about it, but I think it's key that we talk about so much of how great the shortstop position is. Get these guys early, do all this stuff. There's other ways to go about it. There really are. So it's just in the back of you, because unless you're drafting at the front of the draft, you're not going to get one of the big shortstops. So now you're going to either get a pitcher or an outfielder. You're going to bring it back. You're going to get either another pitcher, maybe an outfielder, maybe an Albies, something like that. There's your first 2 picks. Now you have 4 more rounds to get the top 14 shortstops. So you got to start picturing it in your head, like, where am I building? That's kind of the fun of these discussions, and we've talked about it multiple times, is kind of plan your draft, like work from the backwards forward, whatever, just so you know what you need to do, so you're not really forcing things. And the depth in that way, use the depth of shortstop to benefit you, not force your hand, but benefit you. So kind of learn this position and use it to your advantage, not like, oh crap, like I need to go get a guy now. There's so much more to go. Speaking of all that, we won't talk about the first guy because Trey Boo Boo, West Coast Trey Boo Boo. There's an East and
Oh
a West.
man.
West
Holy
Coast,
moly.
California love, Trey Turner. We talked about him last week. He's still number one. Hasn't changed. Don't think it's going to change a whole lot. I do kind of agree with you. The number 2 guy, Fernando Tatis Jr., going up about ADP 2.22. I agree if the shoulder wasn't an issue. He's got so much more power. He's still going to run a ton. I get it. The projections don't care about the injury, and that's because it's not really their job to go care about injuries. This is where you have to kind of sit there and adjust playing times how you see fit. But like even the Bad X 142 games, ATC 142, 44, 45 homers, 24 steals, just amazing stats. Like there's not really a whole lot to pick apart with that Tatis outside the shoulder. So what do you got on him?
Yeah, I mean, I won't spend a lot of time here or else we'll be here all night, but I have Tatis Jr. by more than $4 as the best player on the board based on his projection, which, I weigh the Bad X a little bit more. But I mean, he's fantastic. He's great. There's nothing really to quibble with, I think, in the profile. He just mashes. He crushes. So I think there's every, like, if you feel good about the shoulder, and I think there's a very clear argument about the shoulder, that the shoulder is not going to be worse than it was last year, right? And theoretically, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not Dave McDonald. I'm not Dr. Dave, the fantasy baseball doctor.
Did you listen to the podcast?
I did not.
You
I
have
did
to.
not.
Yeah, I'll tell you off the air.
What?
Well, I won't say that you have to listen to it.
Okay.
It's some
What
of
is it
Zach.
on?
It's some the Draft Champions podcast. It's some of
Okay.
Zach. It's Zach Waxman's best work he's ever done.
Okay. I will check it out. I'm not a doctor, so don't listen to me on this at all. But, I think the argument is last year he had the injury. He injured it twice during the year, and he was still able to put up just absolute monster numbers. And so if you think that the injury will not get worse, right? He will not have another subluxation or whatever you say, because I'm not a doctor, then I think there's every reason to draft him first overall. Because not only that, I mean, he's shortstop. He's also got the additional outfield eligibility,
Which is nice.
which I think is really nice, right? Mm-hmm. Outfield is not, I like outfield actually. I do like outfield, but it's not as deep as maybe we've thought of it in the past. And so he's got that dual position eligibility going for him. I think he's the best fantasy baseball player right now. I mean, even if Acuna was in the draft and healthy and everything, I would still go with Tatis, I think. And for that reason, like, I have no problem if people want to take him number 1.
Yeah. He's definitely a high risk because he hasn't had the surgery, but I'm with you. Like the dude, even when he came back, he adjusted his swing and was still freakish good. The hardest part for him is the swing has hurt him a few times. I'm more worried about him diving and doing stupid things like that just because he's young and that's his game. Like you just play hard. That's just the way it goes. So that's the part I'm concerned with. But it's one of those, if he stays healthy for even 130 games, he's probably out producing most of the league. And if you somehow get 145 to 150, you're probably doing really, really well. So it's just one of those deals. Do you want to take the risk? The reward's very, very good. So just kind of know that won't go in. There's obviously other players throughout the early draft that's very, very risky, and the reward might not be as great. But Tatis, he brings that for sure. So I got no problem with that at all. The third shortstop off the board going at ADP 5, so 3 in the top 5. There's going to be a trend of all these guys going early. Bo Bichette, the aforementioned Bo Bichette, come out 29 homers, 25 steals, 121 runs, 102 RBIs, 298 batting average. The average has never been a question for him. The power, we knew it was there. It really ballooned this last year. Everything was phenomenal. But everything was great for the Jays in general. Projection sites have him as a 2020 type guy, hit with a good average again. I don't have a whole lot more to add about Bo. I know there could be regression coming into play. That's very clear. No Simeon to probably get on base for him. The one caveat I will mention, Mr. Armbarn himself, Ryan, mentioned the ballpark factors. It was very interesting. Like the Giants, I believe, was 25th in baseball last year, and Toronto was like 26 or 27, something like that. But that's not Dunedin and Buffalo as Toronto because they put in a humidor. Remember that. But that goes to show you also how good the Toronto offense was because it did not stop them. So Bo Bichette's a freak. I love him. Will there be some regression? Most likely. That's why I made the comment about Jazz Chisholm being a Bo Bichette light. But the average is tough to beat.
Yeah, I mean, it's Bichette's another one where it's hard to quibble with it. I think the major determinant of his value will be the steals. You know, he had 25 last year. He was 25 of 26 last year, and you might be like, "Oh man, that's amazing." You know, he's going to replicate that, but we know that stolen base success rate is not sticky year to year. And prior to this year, he had 8 stolen bases and 5 caught stealing. So he was 8 for 13. So if he falls back closer to that level of success, maybe he doesn't steal as much. He doesn't end up with as many steals. And I think when you look at the varying projection systems, the bat has him at 15 stolen bases. Zips has him at the most at 25. ATC has him at 21. So that's like the major, I think, question. Everybody's pretty close on like the 25 to 30 home runs. He was right in his wheelhouse for home run per fly ball rate. He had the 29 home runs, 50 barrels. There's nothing strange there. His max EV was the highest that it had been at 115.5, which is up like 6 miles per hour, which is pretty incredible. So like the power potential is definitely there. And then you could see that ground ball rate going down, giving him a little bit more power, taking away a little bit from the batting average maybe as well. So I think the overall package, you mentioned some of the lineup changes that may hurt him a little bit. We don't know what that lineup will end up looking like, but this is all to say, I think Bichette is really good. He's a fine first round pick. I think the major question is just going to be whether the same level of he has the same number of steals as he did this past year. And I think I'm skeptical that he'll hit that again. I think the question is he like a 30-20 guy, a 25-20 guy, or is he closer to that 15 number that the Bat X has him for?
Yeah, I opened up the baseball forecaster while you were talking because I love everything HQ does. I read their articles religiously, and the like the X stolen base stats they have and all these different metrics, stolen base attempt percentage and all this stuff that I just, it's all in one spot for you. It's very, very nice.
Great publication.
It's phenomenal. Like I try not to kiss up to too many companies because I like a lot of them, but like literally they just do awesome stuff. So, yeah, last year, like 29 homers, 25 steals, as we talked about, but his X home runs was 34. So he underachieved there potentially. His X stolen base is 19. So it's like you said, regression. And they haven't projected for 29 homers and 23 steals next year. I don't know how you project X stats like this, Toto. So I'm just going to read what they have. They have 32 homers. They expect more home runs. But similar to what you're saying, their projection is 23 steals. Their X steals is 14. So it's one of those, if he does kind of drop, as you're saying, like there's a big difference. I've always been a 2020 type guy with him. That's just been my mantra. Could things change? For sure. The one good thing is we know Toronto runs. There's no sugarcoating that. Simeon runs. Teoscar even runs a little bit. Bichette runs. They're going to let their guys run. That's a good thing. We'll see to what extent. And all it takes for a guy like Bichette is one little boo-boo, and they're going to slow that down real quick because they need him in that lineup. So that's the thing. It's like he's young. He stays healthy. That's all fine and dandy. If he jams a finger or does something goofy, you wouldn't be shocked if that kind of slows down a little bit. So that's something to keep in mind as well, because like you said, you're drafting him here at 5, expecting that 20, 25 steals. If that comes back a bit, still a great player, but maybe more of a back end round 1, round 2 type, like an Ozzy Albies type potentially. And you're taking him 10 to 15 picks sooner. So stuff like that, just in the back of your head. I still think he's great, but that's kind of the risk when you're weighing things out there. All right, the 4th shortstop off the board. And honestly, it's great that he's kind of getting love finally. Because I think it's been so many. We've done this for this is like our 3rd season, 4th season. I can't keep track. Maybe 3rd season. Tim Anderson is now the 4th shortstop off the board, which He used to be like a sleeper pick for us, or like it was just ridiculous. He's going at ADP around 35, give or take. And the dude's outstanding. Hit 309 again last year. It's 3 straight years over 300, 17 homers, 18 stolen bases. Literally, what he does year in, year out, Boba Shett. Just going to say it. Maybe the runs and RBIs a little lower, but your power, your speed, your average, Boba Shett, everybody. 30 picks later. What do you got, Toby?
Yeah, I mean, I love Tim Anderson. He's 3 straight years of 300 average or better. That's so critical. I mean, it's not just a high batting average. I mean, anything over 300 where you're getting the number of plate appearances that he hopefully is going to get is really nice. I mean, that's the one thing that I'd say is, the plate appearances. I know, the projections right now, the BatX has him at 623 plate appearances. I know it's using the ATC projections. So ATC has 623, Steamer has 692. So I think a lot of it depends on those plate appearances because he hasn't been able to stay healthy. He hasn't hit that 600 plate appearance mark in the last 2 full seasons, and he's only the max plate appearances he's had in any season is 606. Half glass full. You're like, well, he gets beat up. He's not able to play a full season. Wait, how does it go? Glass half
full or
empty.
half empty.
Half full is he's just waiting for that first year where he gets, because there's no reason in that lineup. He plays every day like some of these guys. He could get 700 plate appearances. He could hit 30, that Steamer projection.
He could be 30-30 if he played a full season.
Yeah. So he's very good. I mean, the power numbers aren't quite, what they are from the elite level guys. The stolen base numbers aren't necessarily at the same elite levels, but you are looking at a 2020 guy if he does play a 600 plate appearance, plus season. So he's really good. I don't really have many or any concerns about Anderson. He's really good. 32 barrels last year for those, 17 home runs. It was his highest barrel for a full season, and it's 2 consecutive years of kind of an elevated barrel rate, which is really nice. But I mean, the guy he hits, he has a really high average. He's in a great lineup. Everything's really positive for Tim Anderson. So don't mind him at all.
It's all about the health. He's one of those guys. If I have a back end of a like round 1 pick, like 10 to 15, I pray he somehow falls to be in round 3. It doesn't really, like, if you look at his ADP, he's not going to probably, but 35, that's the 5th pick in round 3 and a 15 teamer. It could happen depending on where you are, and a 12 teamer definitely can happen. So, like, if somehow I can get a couple studs earlier than him in my 3rd round, I'm pretty happy about that. Again, like we talked about earlier, you don't have to force your hand, but he's one of those guys that could be a 1st round value if he stays healthy. So 100% on board with you on that one. Another guy that's been a 1st round value many years, had a down year last year, and he's homeless at the moment, is Trevor Story. Coming out 24 home runs, 20 stolen bases, 251 average. So some similarities to Tim Anderson, massive batting average drop, but previous years, 289, 294, 291. There was a lot of things. BABIP just dropped tremendously last year, but he's going about a half a pick after Tim Anderson. So they're going right next to each other. He's been falling a bit in the last month or so because there's just, questions on where he's going to be. And that's just kind of the way things go. Pitchers move up, questions move down. He's a question. What's your thoughts on Trevor Story? I have 0 shares so far.
Yeah, I don't have any shares of Story. It's less about Story. I actually think that he's a pretty great where he's going right now. And he's actually moving up in drafts. Over the last 2 weeks, he's actually hopped over Tim Anderson, or he's tied exactly with Tim Anderson at 34.5 for his ADP. So I think he's starting to get a little love. I mean, the thing that's interesting about Story is, you look at him compared to, say, a Bo Bichette. Chances are, in the last 3 full seasons, Trevor Story has gone 20-20. And he's cleared that mark by a decent margin. He only had the 20 steals last year, although he was down under 600 plate appearances, but he had 23, 27, and then over 30 home runs. Now, part of that, a little bit of that is Coors. And I know people are kind of like docking him points for being out of Coors, but I mean, the guy's got legit power. We see that through the StatCast metrics. The guy has legit speed. We see that through the StatCast metrics and just his ability to continue to steal quite successfully. So again, I think that the one question is the batting average, right? And, he had the much lower BABIP than his career average at 293. Is his BABIP going to be hurt a little bit by moving outside of Coors? Probably, right? But, the question is really how much. And so I think that's the main question mark. But when you think about his floor essentially being what it was last year of a 251 average, in 2020, theoretically in a better lineup, hopefully I'm sure he'll sign with a winner. I don't think a losing team is going to sign him probably. I think there's a really nice floor there for Story. And I think there's a really high ceiling. And for a guy who's pretty much the same player, I think that he's been since he was going as a first round pick, last year. I think it's a really nice pick right here.
Yeah, no, I have no problems with Story. I just have problems, I guess, drafting because I don't trust. I want to see where he goes, I guess, at that point in the draft. But yeah, I agree with what you said. I think he's rather safe, as you could say. Average should rebound. Power speed's pretty darn legit. So I'm with you there. I know there's speculation a fun team for him to go to would be Anaheim. That'd be really interesting. So we'll see how that all pans out.
I mean, that'd be great. A decent park for him. A lot of opposite field home runs.
Flick it out. He can do that very, very well. So I don't mind that at all. We're going to skip Marcus Simeon. Talked about him last week at the second base show. The one question I do have for you.
Overrated.
Well, that answers my question.
I'm just kidding. I love Marcus Simeon. I mean, he seems like just a great dude. So I shouldn't be doing that. But and he's going like last 2 weeks. He's at pick 45. Yeah, okay. He's falling.
That's been the discussion. That's the discussion of late. Now he's becoming worth the draft price. People are saying.
Yeah, I think he's being drafted appropriately right now. I had a question about it on Twitter from somebody who is actually in. I think he's in. He's in. It's Edwin Turnage. He's in one of my leagues right now. And I think he picked up Simeon in the draft we're in at pick 49. And he was just asking me about it. And I think that's like right around where my spreadsheet has him going as like the 51st player overall.
And that's kind of the question I was going to say is, when we talked about him before, he was like a third round pick, but now he's fallen fourth, fifth round. Is that becoming more reasonable? In the fifth round, I'd be willing to discuss the situation for sure. The seventh shortstop off the board at pick 48, between 48 and 49 these days, is Xander Bogarts. He's one of the guys, team boring. He's kind of team boring, but he's just team awesome. 295 average last year. He's with 300, 309, 288, 273, 294, 320. He hits for great average year after year after year. 23 homers last year. It's 20 or more homers in 3 of the last 3 full seasons. Chips in a few bags. That's the part. He doesn't steal a ton of bases, but going to continue to hit in the middle of that Boston order. You got Devers. Hopefully Verdugo gets on base. You have Enrique Hernandez, who's very good. Hopefully, JD can, he's actually better than people I think realized last year. If he keeps hitting, Bogarts is in a great spot, but he just feels like he's kind of that boring guy. What's your thoughts on Bogarts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bogarts is really solid. One of the issues with him last year, I think he really struggled through injury last year. I want to say in the second half in particular. I think he was dealing with some hand issues. I've heard people talk about it on some podcasts, which would make sense. But yeah, I mean, just all around solid. I think the biggest issue with Bogarts is you're not necessarily getting, there's not really the elite power. He did have 33 home runs back in 2019, but that's a little bit of an anomaly compared to, everything else. And we know that 2019 in and of itself was kind of a power anomaly because of the baseball. And then the steals are, he hasn't hit double digits there since 2017. And so I think that's the major issue. But if you find yourself, and so I think it's just a question of roster construction and kind of fit there, where, you get into a position where you still have a number of really good players on the board. You're trying to address starting pitching. You're trying to address your closer. You're addressing speed. And it's really hard to find yourself having addressed all of that, at that point in the draft where he's going so that you kind of take him. But he's one of these like kind of best remaining players, right? Where you feel really confident that he's going to produce. he's not a risk, I think, in that department unless there's some sort of injury. Like he's going to do well. He's in a great lineup. And so for that reason, like it's totally fine pick. I just think you gotta figure that piece out with the stolen bases and the home and the home runs is less of an issue. And again, like, I mean, there's speed available later on. It just has warts. And one of the warts is batting average. And so if you can address that with Bogarts, then maybe you're better positioned later on. So I think he's fine. I think he's the same guy he's always been, maybe with the slight injury hit last year. I expect him to be back to his usual self this year.
Yeah, he's just such a tough one because I love the floor you get with the average and the power and all that. It's just, man, you better, like you said, have steals figured out early, or you're gonna have to like force your hand on a couple other guys. Like, I don't ever want to find myself drafting Miles Straw, but he makes you almost feel like you have to draft Miles Straw. Not saying you have to, but he kind of puts you in that little corner if you miss out on a few more picks after that. So definitely roster construction makes you kind of have to focus on a few more things because you can get steals throughout the draft, but to get quality steals, like you said, that changes quickly. So that's why these shortstops go so soon. That's just part of the deal. So I don't mind Bogarts at all. It's just I rarely have him on my teams. He just doesn't fit the way I build my rosters. But there's many weeks that he crushes, and I think, man, I wish I had Xander Bogarts. So it's just that's what he does so well, especially in that Eastern Division. You get some of those weeks with a bunch of lefties he's facing or something. You got that monster in left. Like, it's just, or he has a week at 4-game set in Baltimore or something. You wish you had Xander Bogarts. That's kind of how it goes. The 8th shortstop off the board these days, Francisco Lindor. Pick 49 to 50 these days. Rough first season in New York. 125 games is all he put up. 524 plate appearances, the lowest since his rookie season of 2015. 20 homers, though. Still got 20 bombs. 10 stolen bases, the lowest of his career in a full season. Just a lot of things did not go well. Hit 230, low BABIP at 248. That people are optimistic he can rebound. He's good enough to rebound. He's only 28 years old. I don't disagree with that. Just a lot of questions. New York's a tough place to play. Is this a thing that, first year, even Bryce Harper struggled a bit in Philadelphia his first year. Is this can you rebound and get a heck of a steal in your draft right now, or you just avoiding Francisco Lindor?
Yeah, I'm generally avoiding him, which may be a mistake. I mean, we know that he was very recently a first or second round player, as recently as 2019. I think the challenge is, and we've talked about this fairly extensively, obviously he was hit a little bit by the BABIP bug last year. He hit 248. The line drive rate was low, and we expect that some of those fly balls will become line drives, just because of the variance that happens within line drive rate generally. So he'll go up a little bit, but he's not a high BABIP guy. I mean, 275, 279, 291, 280, 248. He's pretty below average from a BABIP perspective. And one of the reasons is because he does hit, a decent amount of fly balls. He doesn't have a great home run per fly ball rate. He had a couple elevated years with the bouncy ball. But since then, we have 11.4% and 13.4% for him. You add to the fact that he's in Citi Field now, and some of those Progressive Field home runs, I think, are not going to go out in Citi Field.
Progressive was great for left-handed hitters.
Yeah, great. It's a great ballpark for left-handed hitters. We had a little bit of the dip in the contact rate, which, that's 2 consecutive seasons now where he's gone from kind of the mid 80s to the low to high 70s. Whether or not he's going to be able to correct that, I'm not exactly sure. But I think when you put it all together, what you're getting is a guy who's topped out. I mean, 284 is a great batting average. That's the best batting average he's had in the last 5 years. 273, 277, 258, 230. Are the steals going to be there to the same extent? He's now in his age, he's 28, so he's still relatively young, but we know that those don't generally increase, as players get older. So I have a lot of questions. I'm not big into Lindor where he's going right now. I obviously think he's going to be better than last year, but I have questions about, what that home run total is going to look like. I have questions about what that batting average is going to look like as well, and the steals. So it could just be recency bias creeping up on me, and he's going to put together, just an absolutely phenomenal season in his second year in New York. But I just think that there are some, it's just not the ideal profile for the environment, I think, for me.
Yeah, I have zero shares as of now. It's one of those where he's one of the guys, the first one we talked about tonight, where it's like I could really see him coming back to backfire on me. At the same time, it's like we've talked about guys ahead of him I like a lot. There's a bunch right behind him that I'm like cool with taking those things and taking my chances elsewhere. So I probably won't have a lot of Francisco Lindor, and that's just the way it's going to go. Like I echo your sentiments. It could bite me in the butt. It could, but I'm kind of willing to take those chances in this scenario. That ballpark, that lineup's better, but there's still a lot of questions. Like is that team going to even run? Like, are they going to run? Because if he's only getting you 10 or less stolen bases, well, you got a lot of guys coming up here we can do something with. So it really changes things quite a bit. So yeah, I'm out on Lindor at this point in time. We'll see how that comes back to get me.
Just one thing while I'm looking at it right now, and this is not a good thing. If you look at Lindor's 40-game rolling average graph and his contact rates, man, it is ugly. He's essentially been on a downward trajectory since the end of 2019.
Cool.
He kind of peaked in his contact rates. And since then, it's like just down, 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 down. The lowest he had the lowest is the end of his 40-game rolling average. He was at 81% in zone and 73.8% in his overall contact rate. That is not a good indication to me at all. That it's just keeps getting worse. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but that would not be an encouraging sign for me to see from a player I was drafting.
Yeah, that's not good at all. So that's a good call on you to find that one. That's definitely need to see some improvements.
I'll tweet it out after the show.
Yeah, because that's not even just a first year with the Mets thing like you mentioned. That's 2019. That's 2 years with Cleveland before he went to the Mets. So that's been a downward trajectory, as they say. So very good find on your part. The ninth shortstop off the board around pick 60-61 right now is the only Vonderfranco. So this is a fun one because people love Wander. He hit 288 last year with a whopping 7 home runs and 2 stolen bases. Big boy stuff there. If you combine his
Bubba.
Oh yeah, if you combine his minor leagues, he had 14 home runs and 7 stolen bases in his 110 games. That's outstanding, people. Projections have him for 17 to 20 homers, 9 stolen bases. The average is what does it for him. Phenomenal average. Doesn't do much else for me. I could be totally wrong. He's super young, a lot of time to develop, but he's another guy that I'll let the hype train just climb on up that ladder, and I will go elsewhere with Vonderfranco. I will enjoy watching him. This is why I love playing DFS. I can enjoy the good matchups and play him in that regard, but I don't have to play him every single game because there's going to be so many days where it's 1 for 3 with 2 walks, no runs scored, and you're just like, sweet. So I'm going to pass on that one.
Yeah, I haven't gotten Franco either. I mean, this is a tough one for me to judge just because we don't have a huge major league, we don't have a huge major league sample, right? But nothing he's shown in the major leagues, like you mentioned, the batting average is going to be the carrying trait. Like, just as an example, the Bat X has him projected at 299. 20 home runs, 9 steals, 84 runs, and 80 RBI in 621 plate appearances. Now, if he were to hit that projection, and that's the best projection that he has, right? Then at his ADP, I have him in my spreadsheet at like 62. What is he at? He's at 64.
Okay, I'm at 61 for the last 3 weeks. So yeah,
61.
So maybe he's fallen even more than probably.
Yeah, so he's falling a little bit, but even that projection puts him right around there, so right around there. And so given that he's, a new player in the league, he's obviously got amazing, phenomenal pedigree from a prospect perspective. But, there's nothing that tells me that his power is going to jump necessarily. When you look at his StatCast metrics, 12 barrels, 4.9%. That's not a ton. The 7 home runs looks about right for him. Like you mentioned, the steals haven't been off the charts at all. And so I think Wander, like what I imagine is going to happen, right? The guy's like going to turn 21 in a month. He's still incredibly young. I imagine the power comes along, but I'm not sure it's going to come along next year. Maybe a couple years down the road. So that batting average, the hit tool, incredible, like real life player, but I'm not sure in fantasy at this point in the draft, I want to go after him just because, like, I don't know, there's relatively similar profiles later on that you could go after, I think. And I'm not sure, and famous last words, right? As the guy who poo-pooed Vlad Jr. last year, I just don't see the ceiling potential right now for him beyond like a 330 season where he hits 20 home runs or something like that. I mean, that would be incredible, but I'm not sure I see it. I'm not even sure I see that as 9 steals, honestly.
At least Vlad showed you power in the minor leagues. Like I read off like his minor numbers and combined his minor league. He just hasn't shown the power and speed to be overwhelming. Like he's still very good. He's very young. It will happen. I believe there'll be a year where we get 20 to 25 homers and maybe get 10 to 15 steals and hit 3 something. Like it's going to happen someday. I just don't want to pay for it this year. If it happens, I don't think it'll be this year either. But I need to see a little more from him before I really, really buy into what's going on there. Because there was a point where he kind of was struggling out the gate, and then he started to get going. He walks a ton. His play discipline's great for a young player. Like amazing stuff. And it might click eventually. Maybe he goes on a tear. I don't see it. Like you even mentioned the StatCast metrics. At least with Vlad, the launch angle sucked, but his hard hit rate and his barrel rates are through the roof. Like we're just not getting that with Wander at all yet. So there's not enough kind of lining up. Like the stars aren't aligning enough. For Vlad, it was like it's almost like a Big Dipper. It's straight, a little crooked, and comes back. Like he just needed that one thing to straighten the whole thing out. You don't really have that with Wander yet. So again, I'm fine being wrong on things, and I'll be wrong on Wander. If he gets it done, kudos to you, Wander. Just don't think it's going to happen. All right, we're going to skip a couple guys here. Javi Baez, talked about him last week. Jazz Chisholm, I forgot to wear this last week, so I'll wear it this week. It's my Jazz Chisholm shirt. It's got to represent the guy from RotoWare.
Oh, nice.
But he's the 11th shortstop off the board. Yeah, Jorge Polanco, the 12th shortstop off the board. Now we get to a new shortstop. The 13th shortstop. I'm going to make everybody so happy to listen to this because, again, another guy I'm not drafting anywhere in drafts. It's Corey Seeger, as he is getting drafted at pick 86-ish, give or take, these days. Like, if you go back to this, it is pick 87. He's dropping even more. 16 home runs last year, 95 games played, hit 306. The average was great, but the power, the games played, he hasn't played more than 134 games all but twice in his career. So I'm not paying for it. Bottom line, just not doing it.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that there's enough there for me. I mean, his career high in home runs is 26 back in 2016, right? When he played 687 plate appearances. He had the absolutely phenomenal shortened season in 2020 where he had those 15 home runs. But even with those 15 home runs, they required a 21.7 home run per fly ball rate, which is much higher than he's had at any point in his career, and about, 5, close to 6% higher than his career average.
I think his hard hit rate that year. My goodness. Like everything was.
Yeah.
Balloons.
I mean, everything's great. And I think the challenge with a shortened season, especially for hitters that we know, is they can be absolutely phenomenal and they can also be, pretty crappy. So, the StatCast data, as it always is with Seeger, is really nice. 115.3 max EV. That was actually the hardest that he's hit a pit. That was the highest max EV that he's had as well. When you look at barrel rate, he did have 36 barrels and only those 16 home runs, right? So a little bit unlucky there as well. 12.4% barrel rate, 15.8% in 2020. So again, the last 2 seasons, that elevated barrel rate, which is really nice as well. You do have the batting average, which I think should be there. The contact rate did dip a little bit last year down to 73.7%, slightly below league average. The K rate did not really move along with that. So I'm not really sure why there's such a huge differential between his overall contact rate and what his K rate is. Maybe it's just a better two strike approach. Maybe it's the 3-2 count. I mean, we could do our usual looking at the 3-2 count splits for one Corey Seager. We're going to do that every single episode.
There's going to be one lucky player every single episode that gets.
Well, he did have an elevated walk rate for his O swing as well. So I would not be surprised if there was something there. So you're getting a batting average, slight power. He should hit in the middle of the lineup. But again, most home run, since 2016, the most runs he's had is 85. Most RBI he's had is 87. So again, what you're betting on is health if you're getting him right here. And still, there's not a lot to provide that huge ceiling unless he just goes he goes off. Which is certainly possible, right? We've seen guys have seasons where they just go off, and like his 2020 season was. All right, let's do it. Let's dive into these 3-2 count for Corey Seager. Let's see what we've got. Oh, here's what we got, Bubba. So he had a 56.3% walk rate last year in full counts, and he had a 20.8% K rate. So the 28.8% K rate is on the lower side for him, although it looks like, he's got 33%, 29.6%, but then recently he's got 22.6, 21.8, 20.1, 21.2, 20.8, and 19%. So actually not a huge deviation from what he traditionally does. But with the walk rate, he got a 56.3% walk rate on 3-2 counts. 47.6, 40.2, but more importantly, recently 38.7, 33.3, 33.3, 32.7. So, he got a little bit lucky with the walk rate there. And I think the beautiful thing about projections is they'll kind of factor that in, which they mostly do. They have him at a lower walk rate than he had last year. So this is just a long-winded way of saying, maybe there was some luck, a little bit of luck there with the walk and K percentage and 3-2 counts. Maybe that changes a little bit. The BABIP was around what his career average has been. So you're looking at a really good average, kind of middling home runs. The stolen bases are kind of, they're not really going to be there for him too. And that's another question you have to ask yourself is, I'm getting a shortstop, no stolen bases. Where am I going to compensate for that in different places on my team? So for all of those reasons, I think I'm out on Corey Seager. Or I'm not interested in him right now where he's going.
Yeah, the power production, the lack of steals, that's already a turnoff for me. The injury concerns, turnoff for me. And now he's playing on a worse team. Like he's off of LA, he's in Texas, tough ballpark to hit in. There's just so many things going up against him. It's just I've never been a Corey Seager guy to begin with because of the injuries, and it's just really not for me this year.
And LA is a sneaky good hitter's park. Like it's not thought of that way, but
once it gets summertime, it gets loud.
Yeah, and like for home runs, it's one of the better parks actually. And Rangers is not good. Yeah. I mean, especially it's at or below league average, I think in virtually everything. And so I think that's going to be that will not be a benefit too. And I think the AL West in general has like the worst stadiums.
Yeah,
It has all pitchers parks except for Anaheim. It's Rangers is bad. Houston, you think of Crawford boxes, but overall it plays as a strong pitcher's park. The A's have like the worst ballpark probably. The Mariners have like the second worst ballpark probably, just looking at it. It's just not good. And then you have Anaheim. And that one's good for lefties.
No Coors anymore. That's
no
fine.
Coors anymore.
Yeah.
Man, don't draft Corey Seager.
Yeah,
do yourself some favor.
There's like people are gonna be like, God, do you guys like any shortstops? Like, yeah, that's why we like to either get them early or get them late. There's a middle point here where it's just like,
well, and a lot of the ones we like too are second base and shortstop eligible. Yeah,
which is nice.
And you're gonna probably want them at second base generally. I mean,
exactly. That's kind of the kicker. Or just draft two of them. Go for that
there
too.
You go.
The next shortstop off the board has not played in the major leagues yet. It's Bobby Whitt Jr. Combined between AA and AAA last year, 33 home runs, 29 stolen bases. 99 runs scored and 97 RBI. It's been well documented how good this guy is. It seems like every day on Twitter there's a new video of him just launching home runs. He's the real deal, and he's one of those guys. If the CBA had the bring the young guys up when they're actually deserved to be up thing fixed, that'd be great. There's already rumors that ain't going to happen, so that kind of puts a bummer on it. But in reality, Whitt's one of those guys that has nothing left to prove. The Royals have been good about bringing guys up early, so you play the risk game. Do you risk him coming? Like if he was up day one, I'd be very intrigued with Bobby Whitt Jr. But there's that question mark that does he come up? And right now I have 0 shares. I have a feeling I'll put a build together eventually where I have some shares, but I have none at this moment.
Yeah, I'm really unlikely, I think, to get shares of his. I think one of the things is just, is where he's going in drafts. I mean, he's still very high up there. And to me, I mean, one thing that kind of stands out and is what James Anderson has said, which is essentially that, AAA pitching was not good last year.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
And so that may, James has said multiple times on his podcast, like he's really downgrading a lot of the AAA hitters for that reason. And so for that reason, Whitt obviously has a very compelling profile with the power and speed. Don't get me wrong. And it's certainly possible he could do really, really well. But there's that piece of it. He's also going, I don't know what his AAA stadium was like, but generally like AAA stadiums are kind of bandboxes. He's going to Kauffman Stadium, where he's going to play there generally as well. So again, the power and speed combo gives him, a nice little foundation to build off of. I worry about the batting average, and I worry that maybe a little bit of last year was a bit of a mirage. And there's just so many good shortstops that are still going, that are still available later on that I'm totally fine waiting.
Yeah, I think that's why I probably don't have any as of this moment, but I'm getting more intrigued. I'll play that because he feels like he's kind of dropping an ADP a little bit too, where he's becoming more reasonable of an option. Like if he gets close to like 100, it's like, like we could start making things work here. So it becomes a little more interesting. The final shortstop we're going to talk about in the top 15 of ADP, the 15th shortstop off the board, around pick 112 is another homeless shortstop. Carlos Correa. The Houston Astros, Carlos Correa, 26 home runs, 148 games, the most games he has played since 2016, 640 plate appearances. He's good for usually 20 homers every year. That's good. Does not run at all anymore. Pretty good batting average. To me, he's kind of like a poor man's Xander Bogarts is the way I would look at him. But I somehow
with less speed and less batting average.
Yeah, and massive injury concerns each and every year. So I never draft Carlos Correa. We saw what he did last year. That's what you get if he plays every day. There's no doubting that. But it doesn't happen very often. So what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I've never been in on Correa. Obviously, that hurt me a little bit last year. But even when you look at the line, 279, like last year, quote unquote career year, right? For him, or like best season in a long time, fully healthy. You're looking at 279, 26 home runs, 104 runs, 92 RBIs. Now, the 104 runs and the 92 RBI are really nice, but there's nothing in that line at all that I can't replicate later on in the draft. I feel like there's just nothing there. There's nothing special about it. It's just like the most blah line you could put out there, and that was his highest batting average since 2017, tied for the second highest of his career, the most home runs he's ever hit in a season at 26, most runs he's ever had, second most RBI. I mean, it was really a career year for him. And it's still just kind of like, I guess.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like we talk about boring players and stuff. He's not even boring. Like when I say blah, he is blah. Like you can pretty much pencil him in if he plays, but it's like who plays more games this year, Corey Seager or Carlos Correa? That's a fun one.
They're both blah.
Yeah, and that's why I just don't draft blah until later in the draft. It's just there's so many things you can get outfielders right now, like your third pitcher, and you go get a closer. There's so go get a catcher. There's Grandal and Varsho are still sitting there at this point in the draft. There's so many other choices than to go and get a Carlos Correa. at least in my opinion. To like we started the show talking about team build. Tell me how Carlos Correa builds you your best team. It just doesn't. It just doesn't.
He doesn't.
Yeah, it just doesn't. Hate to break it to you. If you're a Carlos Correa fan, my apologies. But there's other shortstops you can root for. So that's cool.
Apologies to Vlad Sedler.
Yeah,
mean nothing.
he's always been Team Vlad.
He's been a Team Correa for a while.
Yeah, but the thing for Vlad is we don't have to feel sorry for him. He wins all the time.
know.
So he figures it out.
He does perfectly well for himself.
Yeah. All right. 16 through 25, Swanson, Cronenworth, Adames, Taylor, Glaber, Rosario, Urias, Rogers, O'Neill, Cruz, Brandon Crawford. We'll give two guys each. Why don't you give us your first guy you're kind of targeting in this range?
Yeah. One guy that I like a lot is Glaber. I actually his draft price has been moving up. I found myself drafting him a ton early on in drafts because I think he was going around like pick 180 or something like that. Now his ADP has moved pretty clearly up, into the 140s, low 140s. So it's a little bit less of an appetizing profile. But, I think the thing with Glaber is he's still 25. We've seen him have fantastic seasons, right? He had a great season in 2018 and 2019. He's struggled a little bit since then. One thing that I like is the steals, and I don't expect that he's going to steal 14 bases again. But, he was one of the consequences of being dropped in the lineup is you're going to see him attempt, more steals, I think. And so I think that's just one thing that will likely happen. Again, not hitting the 14 number, but like the BatX has him at 8 stolen bases. ATC has him at 12. Steamer has him at the 14. I think that might be a little bit kind. But one thing about Glaber, the plate discipline is still strong. The contact skills were actually the best that they've been, throughout his career. It's just been the quality of contact that he's struggled with a little bit, but still 28 barrels last year, 7.8% barrel rate, his highest max exit velocity. He only had 9 home runs on those 28 barrels, which is an incredibly low rate, as we know from thinking about that last week. And part of that might be that he goes to center and I think opposite field a lot, with that power and with the dead end ball. I think it particularly impacted guys like that. But there's still no reason why he should only hit 9 home runs out of those 28 barrels. So I think we see an increase there. And then when you look at his splits from last year, and this was actually something I was at Baseball HQ, I mentioned there was like a panel about it, and they were talking, and they were kind of, they weren't that excited about Glaber Torres. And I was like, okay, well, what was Glaber Torres' second half line, right? In 199 plate appearances, because remember, he was injured, he had 6 home runs, he had 8 stolen bases, and he hit 289. Yep. Right? And so if you multiply that by 3, that's 18 home runs, 24 stolen bases with 289. Now, I don't think he's going to steal 24 bases. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. But, like, I think he's going to hit for more power than he has previously, and we know that he can tap into a little bit more of that power. The batting average should be solid with the contact. Wherever he is in that Yankees lineup, like if he's hitting 6th again, it's just his RBIs are going to be better than his runs are. And it opens him up to steal a little bit more often. So I really like the potential for Glaber, both the ceiling. I think the floor is higher than people might expect. Again, like even if he were to replicate what he did last year, it's not an awful season, especially if he gets to the 600 plate appearances. You're still talking double-digit home runs, double-digit stolen bases. And then the counting stats were just remarkably low. Like, there's no reason they should have been as low as they were last year. So I think, overall, I just expect a better season from Glaber. I think he's slightly undervalued where he's going right now. He's losing value by the day because he's getting pushed up. But I do like what he can do as kind of like a solid floor, 5-category contributing guy with a little bit of a ceiling as well.
Well, you're talking to the guy that drafted a ton of Glaber last year, so I know all about the good and the bad halves that Glaber had. And I remember you could probably search BD Entric Glaber Torres or just Torres on Twitter, and especially the second half. I remember like putting little like blurbs together of his last 2 or 3 weeks. I'd look at DFS, look at his hard hit rates and how he's hitting and all this stuff because he looked like the Glaber I was hoping and dreaming of for a while. And you saw, like you mentioned, the second half numbers were great. It was so kind of perplexing. Like, was he really hurt longer? We didn't know about it. What was going on? Because like I understand if he's not gonna hit the monster home runs he hit a couple years back, but just that first half, he just like lack of barrels, lack of hard hit, like everything was just like, what happened? And then all of a sudden he comes back and he's doing it again. So it's intriguing. He's one of those guys. He's still super young. We're not talking about like a 33-year-old dude or something. Like he could still kind of figure things out and see where it goes. They've always been moving him around positions in the infield too. So he looks to be kind of locked in now. I don't blame you. I remember last year, like I think he felt more like a disappointment because he was higher in the drafts. Him and Javi were going neck and neck, probably around pick 70 or 80, give or take. Now you're getting a little bit of a discount, so it's very intriguing. I don't knock it. I'll understand people that don't want to trust it again, but there's definitely upside with Glaber, unlike some other guys we talked about. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, and just looking at his rolling average, his 40-game rolling average, he had a super high ground ball rate for a lot of the season, and then towards the end of the season, he started to get that closer to, well, actually below his career average, but lower, lower in the mid 30s, which is really nice, which is where you want him to be.
The biggest thing with him, I remember very clearly, and maybe the rolling grabs tell me I'm wrong or something, but he really needs to be more aggressive. He is so patient at the plate. It's disgusting at times. And I remember MLB Network talking about it, some of the pros on there and stuff, and he started to get a little more aggressive, I believe, in that second half as well. So we'll see how that keeps going. All right. My first one here at pick 130 is Willy Adames. And I love this because I've been Team Willie for a few years, like we both have. That he's young. He's like the metrics look like he's going to break out. It's coming, blah, blah, blah. What came last year in a big way? 25 homers, 5 steals. He even walked 10.3% of the time, which is the best of his career. Hit 262. He's never going to be a massive average guy, but the power is legit. Like he's showing it throughout his career with the hard hit rates and the barrel rates. He had an 8.1% 2019, 9.9, 11.4% barrel rate last year. Hard hit rates continue to increase. That's one thing we kept talking about. He was showing increases every year in the bigs, and that's what you want to see from a young player. That's like with Vonderfranco. We talked about it. He hasn't shown it yet. If he, like this year, shows a nice little boost in these productions, then he can start buying into the breakout more. Like it won't feel as fluky type deal. Willy Adames to me is pretty darn legit. Like there's maybe some caution. You look at the X stats and everything are a little off and wonky, and he does strike out a lot still. That is a bit of a concern. But line drive rate's heavy, fly ball rate's not bad. Home run to fly ball was actually lower than 2020. So it's not like he went like through the roof last year. He hit 25 home runs. It's 18%, which pretty respectable. Nothing too crazy when you're looking at that from him. And the O contacts and the O swings, you probably want a little less on the swing and more on the contact part, but overall, there have been improvements with the profile of Willy Adames, and that's what I love to see. Not to mention another guy, 26 years old, not too old, going to be leading off or hitting towards the top of that Brewers lineup, which is very, very good still. And he just flourished there when he left Tampa Bay. He admitted he liked the way he could see the ball in Milwaukee compared to the Trop. There's just so many little things he could see. He was happy, he was face painting. Like it was just a different environment for him, and he started crushing it. They were letting him run a lot. I love Willy Adames. He's one of those guys I could see replicating last year, maybe taking even a little more of a step. And we're talking about a top 80 pick next year, potentially. I think he's still got that skill because he's still super young. We've seen that continual development from a top prospect throughout the major leagues. He's learning in the majors, not in the minors. And so that's why it's been different for him. And I love what we've seen. Plus, we've talked about it with that NL Central, the Pirates, the Cubs, the Reds. Like these are great places to face, great ballparks, great teams. I love Willy Adames. So I've been circling him a lot. It's fun. We have an ADP debate later, which I debate nearly every single draft. So I'm going to save that one until later because I love both of those guys. But Willy Adames will be my first one.
Cool.
Who's your next one?
My number 2, I'm going to go with Eugenio Suarez, who's going later on. He obviously has been pretty awful his last 800 plate appearances. His batting average is right at 200. But he's still hitting for the power, 46 home runs over that period of time, 31 last year. As a result, the runs and RBI, the counting stats are decent. He's obviously not stealing you bases. there's just like some contextual things that I really like. Like I love the third base shortstop eligibility is really nice. Like being able to address both of those, middle infield, corner infield, I think is a real nice thing to have and flexibility on your team. The BABIP has been down considerably over those last 800 plate appearances, 214 in 2020, 224 BABIP in 2021. So incredibly low. And in a lot of ways, it feels unsustainably low. Like the only guy who really has those types of BABIPs is Gary Sanchez. And while I have no doubt that Suarez is being shifted and that's hurting him, he is slow. I just feel like there's room to grow on that batting average there. Continues to have solid plate discipline. The O swing is lower than league average. The contact rate and the in zone contact rate are fine as well. They were up from last year. But I think the reason I'm most excited about Suarez was the end of last year. He did really well in September. And so when I kind of look at his 40 game rolling average graphs, I can see some major differences. You mentioned Glaber Torres and some of the changes that he had in his approach, which actually did show up. I did look at those after you mentioned it.
I thought so off the top of my head, but I couldn't remember for sure.
The period of time when he was least aggressive, just overall, was early last season. Yeah. And he was much more aggressive in 2019, and he started to be more aggressive towards the end of the year, closer to his 3-year average, but well above where he was earlier in the year. That's for Glaber Torres. When you look at Eugenio Suarez, though, his O swing really went down. So for all of the season, it was right around 30% for Suarez. It dipped over his last 40 games down to 22.9%. So he was being incredibly selective. His swing rate also went way down to 40.1%. So being very selective. And his in-zone swing percentage also went down considerably to 65.8%, closer to his 3-year rolling average. And what that tells me is he's just being more selective overall on the pitches that he swings at, even if they're in the zone. Because I think, and I got to get this up there, but what I want to say is, so his in-zone contact rate absolutely cratered at the beginning of this year, like down at 62.5%. But then for the second half of the year, it was well above that 3-year rolling average. And then his in-zone contact and his overall contact rate. So what that was telling me is, earlier he was swinging at a lot of pitches in the strike zone. And when he cut down on that, maybe he was looking more fastball, rather maybe he was realizing what he was struggling with more, like within the zone, but he just became more selective. And the results were much better just in terms of his overall contact rate. And then the results were also better, which, you can't really always count on the results, especially just 1 month. But in that period of time, he hit 370, 8 home runs, 15 runs, 13 RBI. So you're kind of hoping that he got his mojo back a little bit, even if he can just hit that second half batting average of 238, with 13 home runs. You're looking at a full season there. That was only 215 plate appearances. If he can just hit 235, 240, with the 30 plus home runs, he's going to be in the NL where they have the DH. So there's less of a concern about playing time. There's just so many things, I think, for Suarez for why he can kind of get back, not to where he has been, right? Because what is he? He's 30 years old. So he's not super old, but he's probably seen his best days. But if we can get back to that 230, 240, 30 plus home run guy, I think that's a really nice, that's really nice for, where you're getting him in drafts right now. He is moving up a little bit though. So just something to be cognizant of. So Eugenio Suarez is a guy that I like, but he's being pushed up again. And, so I may end up getting less of him, but yeah, I mean, if he hits that BAT-X projection of 241, 32 home runs, 77 runs, 84 RBI, I mean, it's just so nice. So nice. Even if he hits the ATC projection of 230, 32 home runs, 73, 83, that's really nice where you're getting him right now.
Yeah, he's an interesting one because, once he started the year at shortstop, moved to third base, seemed like he was very uncomfortable at shortstop, and then maybe he got comfortable. Also, the shoulder injury he was coming back from, and I think it was Carlos Marcano was talking about it in an Eugenio Suarez deal or not, but there was, and I know Derek Rhodes could probably pull it up. The shoulder injury he had and others have had in the past, it's like a couple years before they get back. And you saw it kind of come better towards the end of the year, like you mentioned. It could be one of those, you get a heck of a value this year because you get to see that 230 to 240 average, like you mentioned, and all the power playing third base every day. That because his shoulder feels better now. So there's a lot of interesting factors with Suarez, and the fact that we saw kind of a development at the end of the year is definitely on the plus side. My second guy here is Ahmed Rosario. I'm a big Ahmed fan, going around pick 146 right now. Kind of the way I feel about Willy Adames, the developments Ahmed has made throughout his career. He doesn't have the power of Adames. I'm very, very clear of that. But what he can bring you is, 10, maybe if he gets going, he had 15 homers back in 2019, given that was a special home run year. But if he gets, 10 to 15 homers, he can steal you anywhere from like 15. We've seen 24 steals in 18. Cleveland doesn't run as much as others, but they do run. You got Miles Straw in front of him. You got, Jose Ramirez behind him. The lineup starts to dry up a bit as you go down. So it's a really top-heavy lineup. But the one of the things that I always think about with Rosario that surprises me is he's only 26. Like, he seems like he's been playing forever. And he hits for a great average. 282 this past year, 287 in 2019 with like 256, 248. He's shown improvements as he gets older, is what I like to see. Plate discipline's gotten a little better throughout each year, but you get, double-digit power, double-digit speed later in the draft is like a middle infield option I like a lot. A few other things, if you want to look at him, he has improved his batted ball quality. The barrels aren't there as much as the hard hit rate continues to improve. It was up to 43% last year, which I think is great to see on the best max exit velocity of his career. So if he keeps improving in that direction, he might run into a few more home runs and whatnot there as well. So Cleveland, not a great team. We know that very well, but he will get everyday at bats. He's got, let me double check. I know he did last year. No, he's just shortstop only this year. Last year he was shortstop outfield. That was nice. But the fact you can get another kind of double type guy at this point in the draft, there's not as many of them left that don't really crush you, where I still think it's for decent enough average. Top of the order. Hopefully Jose's there all year, could drive him in like crazy. You can make him your everyday shortstop. That's fine. We talked about, having Miguel Rojas and others. I prefer Rosario as my middle infielder, but I think there's a lot to like there, especially if you go and take a Bogarts early or something. You can get these steals kind of late to kind of help offset things a little bit. But he's a guy that I think we might see an even better, like a hit for him, a career type season. So pretty curious about Ahmed Rosario. All right. Who is one of your later targets?
Yeah, one guy that I have on I think I have him on almost every single team. I should actually see this, like what percentage of my teams I have him on is Paul DeJong. I just think that, let me just check my player shares really quickly. Oh, he's not even in the top there. I have him on 66.7% of my teams. So 4 of my 6 teams so far. And I just drafted him earlier today. So I now have him on 5 of 7 is Paul DeJong. He's fallen so far. I mean, he's going around an AVP of 400. And we've talked about him before. We talked about this a little bit on the review pod, I think, as well. But I mean, the guy, there was really no great change in anything outside of the BABIP. The BABIP was 216, career 282. The line drive rate was super low, but the ground ball rate was fine. The home run per fly ball was actually decent. O swing was fine, right in line with his career average. His contact was actually up from 2020, slightly below his career average, but right there. He had a 10.6% barrel rate, 27 barrels for his, 19 home runs. And they've said that he's going to be the starting shortstop, at least initially. And so, for me, here's a guy that in his last full season hit 233 with 30 home runs, 9 stolen bases. So there's the potential for a little bit of that speed, 97 runs, 78 RBI. I don't see a reason why, he won't continue to be the starter as long as he hits like he has hit in the past. Even the projections right now, they all have him at about 20 home runs, 5 steals, whether it's ATC, the Bat X, even Steamer has him at 19-4. And this is only in 467 plate appearances. He has struggled with injuries throughout his career, But for me, you're getting a starting shortstop, on the Cardinals team. I think they're going to give him every shot to win that job and to play on a regular basis. And if he plays like he has played in every season other than, last year, then I think you can get a really good player and a really nice value going late in drafts.
Yeah, I don't mind Diang. I know Jason Collette mentioned he's working with the hitting coach that helped, Turner and JD Martinez and those guys get going. So that won't stink. I guess the only question is, what are they doing with Edmundo Sosa? That is the question. But I like the power you with DeYoung. Definitely on board with you there. My other option later, and this is more so like a draft and hold league than probably a redraft league, but Ramon Uriah, second base shortstop eligible for Baltimore. Going to play pretty much every single day, which is good. He's got double-digit home run upside, 11 home runs last year. The BatX has him for 11 again this year. ATC has him for 12. Not a ton of steals, but he's going to get on a ton, hopefully hitting in front of Trey Boo and Mountcastle and company. And more importantly, he's kind of a late source of batting average, 279 last year, 360 in a short stint in 2020. But throughout the minors, 258, 263, 260. Like an average is not going to crush you. And in the minors, we've seen him, run pretty decently, had a lot of power early on in his career when he played in Mexico. That's a Mexican league, so let's not go that far. But, in 2018, 13 home runs in the minors. He's got double-digit upside, super late in the draft. I like his upside with Urias, but again, not a redraft, more of a draft and hold situation, but definitely a guy, shortstop, second base eligible that I've been slowly gravitating to after pick 400. All right, ADP debates. This is where it gets fun. We'll start off with one of the tougher ones. A couple of these I think are pretty easy, especially after we discussed things on this show. But we'll start with Tim Anderson at pick 35.4 since January 19th versus Trevor Story at 35.25 since January 19th. Who would you take, Tim Anderson or Trevor Story?
This is a tough one. I mean, I think right now I'd take Tim Anderson because, we kind of know where he's going to be at. And we know we don't know where Story's going to be at exactly. I probably lean toward Tim Anderson. And I think that's just because I have more belief in the batting average. Tim Anderson is a 300 plus hitter. And if he gets you that in 550, 600 plate appearances, that can make a huge, huge difference. And I think the stolen base and the home run differential, while relatively significant, right, depending on what Story ends up. But let's say he hits 29 home runs and steals like 22 bases or something like that. You're talking about maybe like a 5 stolen base difference, maybe like a 10 home run difference, something like that. I feel like the knowledge that Anderson will hit like 300, I think I value that more than I do kind of having to make up 5 steals later on in the draft or make up, 10 home runs or something like that, because I think that's doable later on. And just the overall package that you're going to get with Anderson is really nice. So I would lean Tim Anderson for right now.
Yeah, I'm going to go Tim Anderson as well. Like I said earlier, I think he's got the potential, if the playing time's there, to be a first-round talent that we haven't seen him do because he hasn't stayed healthy enough to do that. But I still have kind of some small concerns with Trevor Story, so you're kind of picking at straws here. And I'll take Tim Anderson as well. I love what we're seeing from him, even in his shortened seasons, and what he could become just is pretty darn outstanding. So I'll go Timmy Anderson as well. The next one, I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyways. Wanderfranco at pick 59, Javi Baez at pick 63.
Yeah, for me, it's Baez pretty easily here.
Same for me. The next one, Jorge Polanco at pick 84 versus Corey Seeger at pick 87.
It's easily Polanco here for me as well. Yeah.
Polanco for me as well. I knew these two would be easy. It's weird because we don't like that middle of the deal, so picking debates was not the most fun.
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. You've done such a great job. I mean, the Anderson versus Story one is really, really good. That's a really tough one, actually, for me. Like I'm still vacillating back and forth of whether I made the right decision or not. Thankfully, I don't have a draft in front of me where I had to make it.
Well, I'm looking forward to your answer here because this is the dilemma I have nearly every single draft. Dansby Swanson, who I love, at pick 120. Willie Adames, who I already professed my love for on the show, at pick 130. I have shares of both of these guys in a lot of places. How do you break down picking between these two?
Let's see.
Swanson has more steals, I believe. If you want a real quick straw, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking
yeah.
here. Let's do a little comp. I mean, I'm leaning towards Dansby
Yep.
just because, I mean, the steals, yeah, and also like, I think I believe in the power, you know. Yeah, so like Dansby has 10 more barrels, despite having similar number of home runs. He has more steals. The batting average is slightly lower, but I think we talked about his BABIP being on the lower side this past year and the likelihood that that's going to go up, along with the line drive rate, since it was very low compared to his career average last year. Yeah, I'd probably go with Dansby. I think a little bit worried about the batting average. I might give Adames a slight nudge in that category, but I think just the overall full picture, I'd probably go with Dansby.
Yeah, I think Dansby's a little more in the steals, Adames on the batting average. One of the kind of other separating factors could be is we know Adames will be at the top of the order. Dansby could hit seventh most days, and that's a bummer. I still have taken more Dansby shares. I'm with you. So if I have to pick one of the two, I pick Dansby. He's going 10 picks earlier, so I'm not the only one, obviously. But I've been faced with this one a lot, and sometimes people help me and make it easier by going and taking Dansby ahead of me or jumping and getting Adames. That just makes my life a whole lot easier. But I kind of like that I've been able to differentiate and get a little bit of both. I'll be honest, because I like both these guys a lot. And it's one of those things, if Dansby all of a sudden, we saw it at times last year due to injuries, the Acuna and company, when he hit at the top of the order, his game just skyrocketed. So I've said it forever. Even when Acuna comes back, either put Acuna third or Albies third. If Acuna's not running, hit him third. Like, that's fine. Have Albies and Swanson 1-2, and then have Acuna third. If they somehow keep Swanson at the top of the order, that'd be pretty nice. Pretty nice.
Yeah, I mean, these were great examples. Just to give you a sense, like on my spreadsheet, the difference between Tim Anderson and Trevor Story is 3 spots, less than $2. The difference between Wander and Baez is a little over $2. Who was the other one? Polanco and Seeger.
Yeah.
It's less than $1. And then Adames and Swanson is about $2. So they're all so comparable, even in what the projections think of them. They're really good debates because they're very likely to be, like you just mentioned, for you and Adames and Swanson. Like, these are going to be the debates that we're all having mid-draft, and we need to know which direction we're going heading into those drafts and why. Or, like, not necessarily you don't need to know which direction you're heading, but you need to know why you're going to go in either direction.
Yes.
Like maybe if you've addressed steals more, then you're going with Adames. And
get the batting average bump with Adames, stuff
totally.
like that. Yeah. And that's the goal on these shows, to help you guys out. Like, you could totally disagree with us and say, I'm taking Vonderfranco. Okay, that's fine. Go for it. But we're just trying to point you of why we think the way we think, to help build the way we build. Toby's very successful at this. I'm trying to be. So we go our separate ways in that regards. But
you beat me in our one head-to-head competition last year.
Wasn't going to bring it up, but you get a chance to get it back this year. Let's put it that way. Let's get some listener questions going on here. Michael Burgoyne asks, Trey Turner versus Fernando Tatis. Do you think Tatis's potential shoulder problems aren't worth the risk? I think we already answered that. We got Turner, but we still love Tatis.
Yeah. I mean, I have no problem drafting Tatis in the first round, or drafting him at all. So I probably should be willing to draft him at the first pick because he is the top player on my board. But I think either one of those options is fantastic in the first round.
And again, I'll repeat it real quick. Like we said, if you're willing to take the risk, if he somehow plays 140 plus games, he probably is still the best player out there. It's just they've said time and time again, if you just don't finally cut on that thing, it's going to keep doing it, and it's just going to get worse and worse. But maybe he proves us wrong. He's athletically freakish, so you never know. Drew at Fru_Dorte asks, if you're in good shape with stolen bases, are you still avoiding Seeger because of injury and part concerns? I am.
Yeah, I don't love him. I mean, if I'm if you believe the projections, which, sometimes, they give you a good starting place and you got to analyze from there, but they kind of like him, they have him as, on my sheet, 88th, ranked 88th, ADP of 96. Now, again, a lot of times the difference there is like the plate appearances and what you anticipate getting there. It's really hard to be good on steals, honestly, like that early in the draft too. Like if you've addressed starting pitching, like let's say you've gotten two really good steals guys. Like let's say you've gotten Story and Turner.
If you've got good steals guys, they're probably shortstops already.
Yeah, that's true. Well, but like let's think about it. So like what is an example of like,
so you get J-Ram and like Kyle Tucker or something.
Okay, so you get 25 steals, but even Tucker, right? You wouldn't get those two because they're both going in the first round. So like let's say it's Ramirez.
Say Tucker and Albies. Say Albies somehow falls to mid second round.
Tucker and Albies. I mean, even those guys, that's like only 35 stolen bases, I think.
Yeah, so you're still not.
So like J-Ram is like 25. Let's say you get J-Ram, and then in the next round you get Trevor Story. So let's say that's right there is 57 steals, right? Your goal, your target in a DC, it's 119, is 80th percentile, right? So you still have that much to go.
You're not even halfway there yet.
Yeah, you're not even halfway there yet. And then even with J-Ram and Story, maybe your slight weakness, not a major weakness, might be batting average at that point, because you don't really have that batting average anchor, because for J-Ram and Story, the two areas where you have a little bit of question marks is where the batting average is going to be. Again, it's not going to be awful, but it could be between the 250 to 270 range, right? You don't have that 290, that 300 guy maybe that you're anticipating. So even in that particular instance, right, you still need 59 stolen bases in the rest of the draft in order to get yourself to the point where you're at 80th percentile. And so, and that the guys that steal bases who are available later in the drafts are going to have some serious warts, most likely batting average or power or something like that. And so I think that's the challenge, is immediately like you're like, okay, I've addressed speed. I can go with Corey Seeger. So you take Corey Seeger there, right? Now let's assume that you've taken a starting pitcher and a closer there. And so you're either taking your second starting pitcher, or let's say you're taking your starting pitcher then. So that's what you have. You have Seeger, those two starters, and a closer through 6 rounds. I don't even think that would be possible, because I think the 6th round that could be possible.
That's
so
close,
you have that through 6 rounds, right? And so you still need, your home runs,
65 steals at least.
You still need like 65 steals the rest of the way, right? You still need to get your SP3, your SP4 in the next, 6 or 7 rounds, right? So you just took Corey Seager, you address that batting average a little bit. So maybe that's like a nice build, right? And then you can target maybe some steals for outfield in the middle there. So I think I don't know. Anyways, it's just, I think hopefully this is helpful in like thinking about what you want to think about. But I think having like a scarce mindset is really important during drafts. Like the minute you get complacent and you're like, oh, my steals are fine, I got like my 3 steals guys. Well, it also leaves you vulnerable to one of those guys getting hurt. And then you haven't addressed steals in any other part of your team. And then you're like, what am I going to do here? So I just think like that's why I won't draft Corey Seager, is because I'm missing out on something. I always want to be hyper focused on those batting average and those steals guys early on, because I want to build like, not just like, I want to build broad and I want to build deep in those categories, so that my team can afford to miss on a couple of those guys. Bingo. Or afford to have them injured. And I can get what Corey Seager gives me later on. Like, I mean, give me Michael Brantley at pick 240, and then give me the combination of, yeah, I mean,
the average won't be as good, but you can get everything else.
I mean, honestly, Brantley and Andrew McCutchen.
Yeah.
Like the combination of those two, like throughout the course of a year, I mean, it's not going to be as good as Corey Seager, but is it going to get pretty close?
They might play more games than Corey Seager.
I don't know, Brantley and McCutchen.
If you combine them as one in a DC, it works that way.
Yeah. I mean, so it's just like, I try to get the things that aren't going to be available earlier on in drafts. And Corey Seager is just too early there. Like, get Jorge Polanco, get Jonathan India, get
That's
Tommy Edman, get Ketel Marte, get even Ketel Marte, right? Like, probably better batting average, pretty similar, equal home run power, slight edge and steals. Just there's so many other directions to go.
Honestly, if you're not, obviously, if you're drafting Corey Seager, it's because you're not worried about steals. I'd wait like 20 to 25 picks later, and that's when I would take Carlos Correa. I'd rather have Carlos Correa than Seager. I know it might be crazy to some, but the pick differential in a very similar profile to me. Like, Correa's got more power, Seager probably has better average. Neither one of them's running. So it's like, and Correa most likely will be on a better baseball team, most likely. So, I don't know. It's interesting. I'd rather have none, as we've mentioned, but I'd rather wait and get Swanson or Adames right after all of them. That'll do some more damage for you. But yeah, it's tricky. Aaron R asks us, who are some of your favorite targets after pick 500?
Shortstops after pick 500.
There's a few, but it's not nearly as fun as other positions.
I'll just go through. Elvis Andrews, probably starting shortstop for the A's.
A lot of shares, a lot of them.
Yeah, like batting average should still be decent. Steals will be fine. So that's one guy. I draft very few hitters later on, so I'm probably going through all of this. That's the only guy who's really all that interesting. Luis Rengifo is kind of interesting. They've mentioned potentially giving him the shortstop job.
Yep.
And if he plays, he's actually pretty decent. He's a 10-10 candidate. So he's a guy that I've gotten if I'm I tried to get at least 4 of each position, in the draft. So if I don't have 4 shortstops, I think I got Rengifo on like 1 or 2 teams. Those are the only guys that are like kind of interesting to me going later in shortstops. Nico Goodrum, if he ends up in a spot, he doesn't have a team right now, but you could easily see him, right? Like going to not the Pirates, but some other horrible team that doesn't have a shortstop, and playing there and hitting in the middle of the lineup. And if he does that, he's another 10-10, 15-15, type of guy. So those are the types of guys that I would take a shot at later on. And Goodrum is likely, assuming he signs on with a team, he's likely to get some dual, even multi-position eligibility, getting moved around as kind of a utility guy, because he can play first, he can play second, I think he's even played shortstop, third base and outfield. Yeah. So yeah, they can move
super
around.
Utility. Andrus, I have everywhere, so I like that a lot. Technically, Nick Ahmed is the starting shortstop. If you want at bats, he can, especially if he can pick when to play him. Loves hitting lefties, so he's interesting. But Taylor Walls is one I'm willing to take a chance on. If he plays enough for late steals, he will run a ton with Tampa Bay. It's just questions like when, where, how is he going to play? But I know like James Anderson loves him, and I get it. It makes a ton of sense, especially in DCs. So he'd be a guy I could look at. I love the Rengifo call. If you just want boring at bats, like they're pretty empty at bats. But if you want boring at bats, Alcides Escobar is a starting shortstop for Washington, and he leads off. Like it's like you look at his profile, and it's maybe 260 and not a whole lot else, but he's going to play every day in front of Juan Soto and company. Like you're probably not going to. Your goal is to not use him, is what I tell people. Like he's your 4th shortstop, but if worst comes to worst, he's going to get you at bats. What are they worth? I don't know, but they're there. John H. asks, is there any underlying data suggesting that Ahmed Rosario can maybe reach 18 to 20 home runs, or is 10 to 12 the more likely reality? I think it's more like 15-ish. I mentioned in my thing, like the barrels keep improving, the hard hit rates keep improving, the max exit velos keep improving. He's young. I think there's signs of goodness. We saw 19 homers in the juiced ball year, but I think you'd be happy with 15. That'd be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like higher end of the spectrum at this point. I think, the major issues, so like the factors that are suppressing the home runs, he has a very high ground ball rate, over 50% for his career, 51.4% last year, 57.8% in the shortened season with the Mets. The lowest he's ever had is 48.3%. So he's pretty consistently, in that band right there. And that's one of the reasons why he also has a pretty high average is the speed and the number of ground balls that he hits. And I think he hits it kind of all over the park. So the elements that we'd really be looking for is like, lowering that ground ball rate, could help him out there a little bit. Last year he only had 12 barrels though, for those 11 home runs, 2.8% barrel rate. He's at 3.3% for his career. The most barrels he's had is 20 in a season. And so if we use kind of like the 62% marker, even in that particular case, you're talking about, 12 to 13 home runs for him there. So I think 15 is kind of higher end of the spectrum for him. But like when you're that relatively low in home runs, he could easily have that season that gets him to 17, 18 home runs. Maybe the ground ball lowers a little bit. Maybe, he, instead of having a 9% home run per fly ball rate, he has that 11.8% home run per fly ball rate, or that, 10.3% home run per fly ball rate that he had. And just like even that little uptick that can be like 1 or 2 more home runs that kind of can kind of push him over the edge. So I think those are some of the things. Let me just quickly check right here. And I don't have any shares of Rosario yet, and that's one of the reasons why, is just because like it does seem like there's a little bit of a cap there on that stuff. But let's just see like if there's any changes. Yeah, I mean, like even last year, the ground ball rate was up towards the end of last year, higher than his 3-year average for most of the year. And even for like a guy like that, like his hard hit rate did slightly go up like a little bit. So maybe that's a glimmer of hope. If we look at, let me just quickly, well, anyways, this is all to say, like, sure, he could hit something like that. I think that's in the higher end of the range of outcomes for him. I would not bet on that necessarily.
All right. The last question we have this evening is from buddy D. Mendy, David Mendelson. He just couldn't have cheesecake having the only questions on the show, so he had to come in here. Am I crazy to think that if Whitt starts the year in the big leagues, that he'll be a top 50 hitter in 2020? He's shown the ability to make adjustments fast at every level, and the home run and stolen base upside he possesses is dynamite. Real quick, before you answer that question, I just want to do something real quick for fun here, just to see if we can tell Mendy something real funny on the show. Let's scroll on down here to good old Bobby Whitt. Bobby Witt's already the 53rd hitter off the board, so top 50 I think is very likely if he's from the get-go.
What was the question though? Will he finish there?
If he starts the season in the big leagues, does he have top 50? Will he be a top 50 hitter?
Oh, right now I'd go with no. No, I don't think
yes.
so.
I'm going yes.
You're going with yes?
I believe
I'm going with no. Going with no. I'm still a little distracted by this Ahmed Rosario thing. Yeah, like his average exit velocity on line drives and fly balls is 90.8, which is 118th out of 132. So I don't see the potential power boost for Rosario, but it is possible. Whitt, we talked about him extensively. Yeah. I just have concerns. I think, the one thing that he does have going for his favor is the power speed combo. If he can combine that with a higher batting average than I anticipate, then sure thing. But I have questions.
Yeah, no, it's very valid because I usually am. You are similar in the same regards that, prospects, I'll pass, prove me wrong type things for the most part. That's why I have no Whitt shares. I've passed every time. He's falling in drafts now. So like I said, I'm getting more curious because I believe in the power speed. I really, really do. I'm more concerned of when does he play. That's the question. That's why I've passed every time. So we'll see. But yes, for me, no for Toby. Fun one when we disagree. That's always fun. So it doesn't happen nearly that often. So it's fun to see that happen. But what are your final thoughts on shortstop? It's a fun position. It's deep, but kind of not the most appealing at times.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're definitely paying for what you're getting. You're paying for the production that you're getting, and there isn't a ton of value there. But I do think, there is a lot of like later round shortstops. I mentioned Paul DeJong. I mentioned Miguel Rojas as a guy I have. JP Crawford, guys who are just kind of, they're in the lineup, they're playing every day, they're not doing anything spectacular, but like JP Crawford, I think last year had 88 runs, and he was going after pick 300. Didn't steal as much as maybe we anticipated that he would, but there's no reason he can't jump that up a little bit, maybe tap into a little bit of power as he gets older. So there's a variety of different kind of profiles there. I mean, even Alcides Escobar, you mentioned him like going that far late. I'm kind of kicking myself for not going after him because like my assumption was that he was not for some reason going to be the starter. And now I'm like, oh, if he's the starter, I mean,
think he is. I'll double
no,
check.
he's in roster resource.
Yeah. They don't have anybody to play there. I know that.
Yeah, he makes he makes a ton of contact. Like the batting average is going to be decent. He hit at the top of the lineup at the end of last year and was actually super valuable down the stretch in terms of runs and stuff like that. So that's probably a miss on my part there for not having more shares of him later on. But yeah, I mean, it goes deep. It's a deep position, and there's a lot of different profiles to go after. Just make sure that you utilize it well. Because like we mentioned before, like shortstop is one of those positions where you're getting your speed from. And if you don't get your speed from there, then you're going to have to figure out the first baseman or the third baseman or the corner infield or the util or a super heavy stolen base outfield, like how you compensate for that, or just draft JT Realmuto and Dalton Varsho. That could work too.
Bingo. That's a great way to wrap things up. But yeah, fun position, not as necessary as people make it out to be. But it's because the elite guys do help you in the big category that is speed that everybody focuses on. So hope the podcast helped. As always, shortstop positional preview in the books. We'll be back with you guys next week with third base, the hot corner, the favorite position of so many analysts out there, which I better than we'll give it for. But we'll have to see. It'll be a fun discussion on probably not so great players. We'll see how that goes. But until then, you can find Toby on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. I'm at BDentric. This is Bubba and the BatFlip episode 112. Catch you guys later.